Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Karl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion, or we want to be contemplative, or simply ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to welcome you to our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that resonate with our fellow friends and seekers here in the desert.
Our hope is that you will find life for your body, soul, and spirit.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary Podcast. I'm Laura Forehand, and I'm here with Karl, and we have a very special guest today. Before we get started, I'm a little under the weather, so I'll do my best not to cough and, like you said, hack or whatever.
Usually that's my job. Usually that's what I do through half the podcast.
Yeah, I just think it's allergies, but whatever. You have anything you need to mention before we get started?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
So we can just.
Well, we're here today to talk to Pastor Brian Kirk. He is pastor of First Christian Church in St. Joseph, Missouri, and we're just really honored to have you on the podcast and get a chance to hear your story. And so welcome so much to the podcast, Brian.
Thank you. I'm really privileged to be here and appreciate your interest.
Absolutely.
So Laura and I, over the past several years, I suppose it's been 3 or 4 years that we've been doing this. We've really just listened to people's stories. People that are coming out of religion, people that are struggling, people in different walks of life and so on. And we really think stories are sacred. We think your story is really important. And we count it an honor to hear your story and to hear about how you approach the world. So we want to hear that, and this is about what you think. So just kind of tell us who you are, how you got where you are, whatever you want to tell us.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I grew up in Jefferson City, Missouri. My father, by the time I was around, he was a retired Methodist pastor. He was working in the prison system as a social worker, but he still had a little church on the weekends that we would go to out in the country. And so that was sort of the beginning of my church experience. My older siblings had grown up with him as a full-time pastor, and many of them are not churched anymore. They sort of saw a side of the church with their dad as a pastor that didn't agree with them very well. I didn't have that experience though, because my dad was just barely pastoring by the time I came around. But I really, almost from the time of my childhood, have always been in church. There was a small point in my early high school days that I sort of got disaffected with the church, and my parents let us stop going, which may have been the smartest thing I ever did, because then on my own, I decided in my later high school years to go back to a church that I had picked out. But I would say in my early college days, and we're talking mid-'80s, I started what they now call deconstructing. I started, really asking questions that nobody was asking, and reading things like I really got into John Shelby Spong, Bishop Spong's books. And he was asking the same questions I was. So finally, I had at least these books to look at and talk. And I started engaging people at the church I was serving as a youth minister at the time. Around these questions and these texts. And fortunately, they were willing to talk with me about it. So that church that I was serving in Jefferson City as a youth minister for about 10 years, they finally were the ones that kind of encouraged me to go off to seminary. And the associate pastor there happened to have attended a very liberal seminary in St. Louis, Eden Theological. And so that's where I ended up. And so I've been on this progressive journey for quite a while. In my earlier days, when I was serving as a youth minister, I was also a public school teacher, but I had to leave all that behind when I went to graduate school. And so I've been a full-time pastor in one way or the other since my days in seminary. So really about a 30-year career now in the church in various functions. And right now, for the first time, serving as the senior pastor, at a church here in St. Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
So just so everybody knows, St. Joseph is about an hour from us. It's where we do a lot of our shopping,
Go out to eat. There's not many restaurants where we live.
Do all of those things. Yeah. And we have at times attended churches in St. Joseph. We went to the church we're going to talk about later, but we also attended Word of Life Church.
Yeah.
And so we're familiar with your area where you live. And also we live in the same state. So we're neighbors here that I'm glad we finally got to meet. So this is our, before we get into the issue that we want to talk about, I hope you don't mind me saying that you are an LGBTQ person, right? And
I sort of left that part of my biography out, didn't I? I do identify as gay. Yeah, and I'm married to my husband of over 20 years.
And so I have a really serious question. So it seems now that to use the word queer is okay as a I mean, for some of us that's kind of simpler, but also we're like hesitant too because it sounds not
derogatory.
Sounds derogatory a little bit. It's
right.
Like the N word. I don't want to say that when I'm not supposed to, and things like that. But anyway.
Yeah, we all grew up with it as a pejorative, and I certainly heard it a lot as a young person. And so, in a way, I guess we've taken the word back, and it's very common now, at least in the circles I am, particularly as we keep adding letters to LGBTQIA, and there's more beyond that. I can't even keep them all straight. I shouldn't have said straight, but anyway. So queer sort of is the umbrella term that many of us use now. So I do refer to myself as a queer pastor. It's partly because I think it's a good way to sum up who I am, but it also is off-putting to some people who don't understand how you could be both of those things at the same time. So I do it somewhat for the shock value.
Yeah, and I would say as a part of my deconstruction, that was probably that was one of the big issues, along with hell. I wanted to find out what I thought about hell. But then I don't know, you probably remember the issue about baking the cake, whether you should bake the cake for a
same-sex couple.
For a same-sex couple.
Oh, right. Right.
So I got up in the pulpit in a Southern Baptist church and started wrestling with that idea of should I or shouldn't I bake the cake, and went through it. And at the end, I say, you know what, I think I'd bake the cake. And the guy in my congregation, his head just about spun around backwards and his face turned red. And
I bet
that, that didn't, get us kicked out of that church, but very definitely was one of the key issues that started moving me forward and saying, what do I believe, and what do I really believe, and who do I want to stand up for, and things like that. And not to be just kind of whatever, but what would Jesus do? Was kind of the question, was how would he react? And so anyway, before I lose my voice, so I'm watching the old church website that we used to attend. Used to be called Grace Evangelical. Now it's called Grace Calvary Chapel or something like that.
Right. That's right.
As a new pastor, and there's some discussion going on, and I don't remember if it was on their website on their Facebook or somewhere else, but there was a discussion about this issue, and it involved you. And this is where, our stories kind of cross and our paths cross. Can you help us by narrating that situation? How did that come about? What happened, and what's happened since?
Yeah, when the new pastor, Josh Blevins, came to town, I think within about a year, the church, with his help, launched a website called Vote St. Joe. And it's a political website that basically lays out all the political issues going on in the community. And without exactly doing it, they're telling you who to vote for and who not to vote for, and also encouraging political activism on the part of their congregation members to get themselves elected to political positions in the community, or appointed. So early June, I got alerted that I was on that website, that they had put up an entire alert. A whole page of the website was about the fact that I was serving currently on the library board here in town. That's an appointed position by the city council, and the mayor appoint you to it. And I was up to be reappointed for a second term. I'd already served 3 years. And they got wind of the fact, somebody did, that I was person that was affirming queer people on my Facebook page, and that I happened to be a pastor, and they thought that that was egregious. And so the website was saying, you need to take action here, contact the mayor and the city council and say, we do not want this person reappointed. And it went on to talk about, we don't want the sexualization of children in our public libraries. Now, it didn't say I was doing that, but of course, there's one paragraph about me, and then the next paragraph is we don't want sexualizing children. So there was this attempt to sort of, connect me to that issue. And within a day of that going up and me finding out about it, the mayor had made the decision to rescind. He'd already put my reappointment up to the council that was going to be voted on it. He rescinded it. And that's it. That's the only discussion. And the director of the library was concerned about that, was really unhappy that they were just pulling my nomination with no explanation. So she and I went to talk to him about it. He was willing to speak to us. And he said, well, I've had, a couple of dozen emails and phone calls, and they're all saying we need to pull you out of this position. And I can tell you that the city council, you don't have enough votes there to support your renomination. They're voting against you. So for your sake and the sake of the city, to avoid all this conflict, I'm just pulling your nomination, and that's just going to be the easier way to approach it. I asked him, what's the problem? Why do they not want me reappointed? What are they saying to you? And he didn't want to get into any specifics except to say, people are concerned, about all this woke ideology going on and the pride flags all over town, and people want to paint a pride crosswalk downtown. And he said, it's just, it's bothering people, and, that's just the way that it is. He went on to say, I don't have a problem with it. I have one of those people in my family. But you're right. But that wasn't enough, So what the mayor in essence was saying to me was, I'm going to go the simpler route of, I'm just going to give in to the discrimination that's coming your way and let it go. Where he could have chosen to say, but I'm not going to let this stand because they appear to be the only issue with you as a citizen of this community who has faithfully served on the library board is that you are gay. And that you affirm and support gay people in the community. And he could have said, and that's not right. That's discrimination. I'm going to go to the city council and lobby on your behalf and explain to them that if they don't have a better reason to vote against you, I'm going to make them publicly say, why are we not approving this person? That's, of course, not the decision that the mayor made. I think he thought I was going to go away quietly. I did not. And so that's how we sort of got into the situation this past summer that sort of blew up publicly for quite a while.
Yeah. And so just to be clear, your job on this council, this library council, the way I understand it was basically to approve budgets, to decide whether to fix the sidewalk, things like that. You really had no control over which books are selected or anything like that.
No, and that was I think a point of contention all along, because that was the concern. I think the pastor of Grace Calvary Chapel had walked into the library one day and seen an LGBTQ affirming book, and it really put him off. And he was concerned that we're going to be seeing more of that. And so, of course, we did try to explain to all these folks, that the library board only covers fiduciary and policy issues and upkeep of facility. Mm-hmm. We, as you just said, we have nothing to say about the content of the library or the program. That you leave up to professional librarians. They just didn't want to hear that, though. And no matter how many times we said that or explained it, I even had pastors, conservative pastors, who would speak to me and say, I'm sorry this is all happening to you, and this really shouldn't have gotten so personal about you. But if you were to stay on the library board and say they wanted to come and do a drag queen story hour, you'd oppose that and vote it down, right? And I said, well, I would have no more to say about that on a library board than you would. I'm just a citizen like you. The library board doesn't have anything to say about those. And that pastor just would not accept that, By the way, this was another big issue, was that the library here, one of the libraries locally, did have a drag queen story hour about 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. It was mildly controversial. There were a few protesters that showed up. They were all from out of town. There weren't any local protesters there. And it happened. It was part of a diversity month where they were having in different kinds of speakers to talk to kids on a variety of issues, including LGBTQ. Nobody opposed the other ones. It was just that one. But my name got linked to that, even though it all happened before I even started serving on the library board. I had nothing to do with it. But the church that was opposing me kept connecting me to, we don't want more of this kind of programming, even though they full well knew I had nothing to do with it. Although I did support it. I didn't have any problem with it at the time, but I wasn't even on the board at the time that the library staff was making that decision. So there wasn't an attempt, I think, to be honest in the whole issue, because we kept saying over and over, why do you not want this person serving? I think the church was pretty clear. Our reason is he's gay, or he affirms gay people, and we don't want that. Mm-hmm. The city council couldn't use that as the reason, so they just kept tight-lipped the whole time, except in their private emails that we received by the Sunshine Law. We were able to see that the city council was agreeing with this church that was saying, yeah, we also agree that this guy and the work that he does publicly on the behalf of queer people is not appropriate, and we don't want him in our library board. So they were discriminating, but not publicly the way that the church was.
Yeah. So this Bible pastor, this biblical pastor, certainly went through the typical way of confronting people, in that he came to you first and talked to you individually, right?
Well, you would think that would be the way to do it, right? Yeah. No. I mean, of course, I just wake up one morning and find out I'm being attacked all over social media by people I've never even met, and they're saying things about me. Of course, I'm like, well, I don't know who they're talking about, but that's not me. In fact, when it looked like very early on, before the side that was supporting me sort of came forward and started saying, we're going to stop this, we are supporting Pastor Kirk, it looked like it was a foregone conclusion based on what the mayor told me, that I was out. So a young man in my congregation, a teenager, contacted me because he was following all this. He said, hey, I think you should reach out to that other pastor. And just talk to him, and maybe he probably doesn't have a good reason for this, but maybe he does. Maybe you guys should talk. And I did not want to do it, but this young man, I think he understood maybe scripture better than these two older pastors did. So I contacted Pastor Blevins and said, looks like you guys were successful. It looks like I am not going to be reappointed. So how about we get together now and just talk as two Christians, just two people that love the church, who have entered ministry. I said, we don't even need to talk about this controversy. I'm just curious to hear how you ended up in St. Joe, what your faith story is, what are you trying to accomplish as a pastor? And he thought about it. He was a little reluctant, and we were just talking over Facebook. He then, within about 24 hours, he contacted me and said, he goes, okay. He goes, yeah, I think we could do that. We could meet over coffee. And so we set a date to meet the next day, actually, and about an hour before I was supposed to meet with him, he messaged me over Facebook and said that he had decided not to meet with me. Oddly, the reason he gave was, he said, and he's apologized. He said, I should have done my due diligence. He said, I didn't until last night. I had not, listened to any of your sermons or looked at your church's website. And we're a very progressive liberal church. A lot of people deconstructing in our congregation. And he decided, based on what he saw there, he said, we theologically are so opposed to one another. We are so different that we would have nothing to talk about. And he was very apologetic, said he probably should have thought about that ahead of time. Now, I will say this, for me, that would be the reason to get together. Right. And I told him that. Exactly. Said, right? Exactly. I said, I would be just really interested. I've not spoken to a person from your background within the church. I would have been fascinated to hear what he might say. Right. What's his point of view, and how did he get into ministry? And maybe, by chance, he might have given me the time to listen to my story, and maybe we would have gotten to know each other as people. Mm-hmm. But he kind of left the door open that maybe we could have that conversation over email in the future. That has not happened. So I also thought that since he had planned to continue his, I don't want to call it an attack, but that's what it was, to publicly criticize and come after me. It was probably easier to do that if he had never sat down at a table with me over a cup of coffee and met me as a human being, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So to him, I'm still just an issue, an object out there that they were using as part of the culture war to say this guy's a problem. with, no evidence that I'd actually done any of the things that he was worried about. I did see a Facebook post on his Facebook page where somebody said, "What has this guy done? What are you worried about?" And he said he hasn't done anything yet, but he could do something. And so I guess with that, we could all be condemned for any possibility, right?
Exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. Isn't that all of our situation?
Yeah, you're judging me based on what you imagine that I am.
Or might happen.
Or might happen. Or like you said, he's painting you as an ideology that he has about you.
And to your point, Karl, I had tried to sort of subtly given him sort of that biblical injunction that, if you have a problem with your Christian brother or sister, you're to go to them, and that would have been, and I tried to explain to him, imagine what it was like for my family for this to happen, where we're suddenly being attacked, not just by his church, by other conservatives in the community who were saying pretty awful things about me. There was a lot of innuendo about me online that, this guy's a danger to kids, because that was what sort of the church website had insinuated. And so there was a lot of that going on, which personally bothers me because before what I do now, full-time pastorate, I had a career as a public school teacher, an elementary school teacher. And then I had a career as a youth minister working with teens in the church. And working with young people has been a sacred call for me my entire career. So to have people suddenly, with no evidence, good Christian folk, accusing me of terrible things was particularly distressful for my family and my friends.
Yeah. And, for a conservative evangelical to assume that about the other people, when it's more often happening within their boundaries these days, that's just adds to it. So sorry that happened to you and that you had to go through that. Has there been any positive that's come from it? What have you seen?
Well, what really shocked me in all this, so the council meeting, the first city council meeting that was scheduled after all this blew up, they were supposed to vote then on who was being appointed to the library board. They postponed it for months. So they weren't going to vote on it, but we could come and speak during the open public comment time. And we were encouraging people that might have a problem with this to show up. Well, a ton of people showed up. The vast majority were people supporting me, or at least who believed that this was discrimination and needed to be spoken against. So that was a positive, because St. Joe, I don't know, some people describe it as a conservative community. I would describe it more libertarian. There's certainly, it's heavily Republican and it is conservative, but it's a conservatism that is sort of a live and let live. You stay out of my way, I'll stay out of yours. I mean, we've had a Pride festival here for 10 years and had one protester the entire time.
Oh, wow.
We've got gay straight alliances in a couple of our high schools. We have an LGBTQ liaison officer that works with the police department. We have gay affirming churches here in town. So it's not a community that's, that I would have up until, this summer have said anything other than, people may not fully embrace LGBTQ folks, but they certainly believe that we have the right to live just like they do and we're citizens just like they are. So this kind of all threw me for a loop, but I was really impressed by the number of people, particularly young people, that came out at the two protests that we had at the city council meetings. And some 70 people that spoke on my behalf, or who just simply said, this is the wrong road for our community. So that was a good sign, because you don't always know that about your community. And I don't know, had I only lived here for a year, I don't know that would have happened. The fact that I'd had a decade here of building relationships and being involved with the community and setting down roots here meant that there were people who were saying, hey, this is not who we are. And I think I pointed out the pastor who started all this, he's only lived here for 2 years. He came here from California. And in some ways, I thought he misjudged our community. I think he thought people were going to be, fully in support of this, but really not even the conservative pastors in town came out to support what he was doing. And as I mentioned before, a couple of them spoke to me in private and said, we don't think this is a good thing that's happening. This isn't good for you. It's not good for our community. Christians shouldn't be doing this to each other. So I think that was one good thing that came out of this.
So in 2016, the world changed a little bit because of, something pretty obvious. And for a lot of people, that change and that power dynamic that had been going on a long time since 1980, moral majority and all of that had been building steam, and then it came to a head, in my opinion, under the leadership of a crazy guy. That Donald Trump went into office, and a lot of things went wacko. And then we had COVID, where everybody was at home too long and on the internet too long, and believed some unreal things. But so I've seen in the deconstruction world some good things come out of that. That people finally see, they can see what they weren't seeing before. That what's underneath all this conservative evangelical Christianity. Is it just a big machine, and so they're kind of uncovering those things, but then they start to examine what they believe, and they, like you said, there's deconstructing people in your church, and so on. People are evaluating. Do you have hope for the future? One of the issues that you obviously live with is LGBTQ issues, but there's so many others. There's gun issues and so on and so forth. There's lots of things. Are you hopeful that maybe we're turning in a better direction? Even though this guy rolls into town and for no reason at all critiques you and gets enough people behind him to get it done. But still, do you see, just like you mentioned a little while ago, is there hope maybe in the younger people, the next generation, that we're finally going to at least get a lot closer to all these issues we're trying to fight for?
Yeah, I always tell my congregation, we have to be people who are hopeful and optimistic, or we might as well give it up. I mean, I don't know what we're doing together on Sunday mornings if we're not trying to find hope in the message of love and justice and peace and compassion, which is what we talk about at our church. I do think the changes that we've seen, the rise of Christian nationalism in our culture, which much of that is growing out of the conservative evangelical movement, is a sign that they know that they are not winning the hearts and minds of the culture. I mean, we know that the numbers of people attending churches is declining. So it's sort of, in a way, a last gasp, and that makes me hopeful. This sort of, if we can't convince people to be Christians, then we're going to use the political system to force people to live the way we want. And I think that's a lot of what Christian nationalism is. It concerns me that what those Christian nationalists might be able to do is to say, we're in the minority now, but we're going to make the laws in such a way that we can still rule as the minority and force people to do what we want to do. But it's strange for me to say this, but as a pastor, I'm somewhat hopeful that Christianity, at least the version of it we've been saddled with for so long in the Western world, is dying a fairly quick death, and it probably needs to. That sounds weird, but I'm hopeful about that. And my church, we talk a lot about this. We talk a lot about how will church look? How will Christianity be different? And how does it need to be different in the next 50 years? It's not going to survive the way it is. It's been in many ways infected with the virus of conservatism, of Christian nationalism. And I think that's what you see a lot of young people and people even my age, that are deconstructing, who are saying, we've kind of seen the cracks in all of this. We've seen it's not what we were told it was. It doesn't produce fruit that causes people to love and care about each other. And that makes me hopeful as a pastor. It says we're looking at who we are and saying, what does any of this have to do with what we at least believe the scriptures are telling us Jesus was all about? If it isn't about justice and care and love for other people, why are we here, and what is all this that we're doing? And so even in my church, we're looking at all the rituals that we engage in, the songs that we sing. We've talked about, why wouldn't we be a church that embraces people of other faith traditions who need a place in our small community to come because there isn't a place to go? Why wouldn't we be a church that embraces people who are perhaps atheists, but say, but I think the values you all subscribe to, caring about LGBTQ people, nonviolence, protection of the environment, women's rights, racial justice. If a person were to say to me, I don't really get all this God stuff, but I'm with you on all of that, I'd say, well, come join us and help us learn from you, and you hopefully will learn from us. So all of that gives me hope, but it's only hopeful if churches and the Christian faith as a whole in the Western world is willing to really undergo a massive change. It's going to happen whether we like it or not, but we get to choose right now whether we want to be part of it or we're going to resist it. I see a lot of resistance going on, but there are pockets where it is happening in a way that's creative and hopeful, and so that I look towards with a positive light.
You mentioned young people a few times in our discussion, and it always makes me think of our own children because they grew up in, the conservative evangelical church. I mean, that's all Karl preached at. Those are the types of churches that he preached at, even if that wasn't like your message necessarily. But do you feel like a lot of this hope and change and things that we're seeing that are positive are coming? I know I do agree with you that some of that is coming from our age group, if not older. We came to see you speak, and I was amazed, to be quite frank, at how many people older than me, like maybe my mother's age in their 80s, were there to support you and Jess Piper speaking. But do you feel that a lot of this transition that we're seeing with the hope and the change and all of that is coming from maybe kids are our kids' age, which is like in their 20s and early 30s, because they're the ones, our own personal children are the ones that really got us to thinking, because exactly what you were just saying about, questioning, are we really loving and showing justice and, working to fight discrimination? Like, we learned that from our children. And it's always kind of mind-boggling to me because they were raised, I'll use air quotes, in a conservative church, and yet they're in a small town. Okay, because we've always lived in really, really small towns, small rural towns where things are quite conservative, and it just amazes me. I don't know how much more accepting and how much more they advocate to all of that. And so I guess I just want to know, your perspective on the young people and how are they making that difference? Or, anyway, I'll let you answer that question.
Well, I agree with you. I think the hope really is with that 20-something, early 30-something group. My anecdotal experience at my church is when we get folks in their late 30s and 40s who are deconstructing, and particularly the ones who have left very conservative churches, and they've somebody said, hey, that church is a safe place to go and do that. What I'm finding most often is they come to us. We do provide safe space for them to deconstruct, ask any questions they want. What most of them do is deconstruct, though, eventually out of the church altogether. Mm-hmm. We're sort of the last stop before they say, I'm done. Mm-hmm. And I totally understand that. In some ways, they're like, I don't have the energy to try to redo this all over again and try to find a different version of Christianity. And in some ways, when you're deconstructing on a very conservative version of Christianity, if the next step is you walk into a very progressive liberal church, for some of them, we are so different from what they experience that we almost don't look like church. So they're like, okay, maybe I just don't need church anymore then. And I understand that. Where I do see much more promise, as you pointed out, is often with the generation after that, the 20-somethings, early 30-somethings. some of whom weren't raised in church in some cases because their parents were already kind of going to that process. So they come to church without the baggage that some of us were raised with. Church is boring, or church is weird, or they just want your money. I mean, all the sort of things we grew up with thinking about church. So they're coming sort of on their own, and they've maybe heard something about what church is or Christianity, and they're receiving the rituals for the first time and seeing, oh, why do we do this? And why do we have this communion meal every week? Or, why are we singing, together? But the good thing is, by them asking all those questions, they're also forcing us to ask the same questions. Why do we do this? And what is this what are we really all about here? So I do have hope that generation, as you've pointed out, if we give them the freedom to come in and be the church, be the version of Christianity that they need to be and that they feel called to, instead of saying, no, you just got to do what we've all been doing. I think there's some hope there for that. It may be, though, that we may see the end of the institutional church. I imagine that generation saying, we're much more interested in meeting around coffee shop tables and in people's homes, a more intimate, less performative. A lot of what, even in my church, you got a bunch of people up front doing things, you sit in seats and watch them do it. It's very performative. And I think our younger folks are saying they want a more intimate version of the faith. And so, I don't know, we may go back to the house church movement that was popular in the first century and then has, kind of come and gone various times since then.
Right. I love, though, that, we've been a part of, either have pastored or just been congregants at many different churches. And a lot of times when you ask those questions, it's, well, that's just the way we've always done it. But I love that you are taking those questions and going, yeah, why are we? I think that's going to show like so much growth just to be able to do that. I wanted to kind of flip this a little bit, though. So I'm a school teacher. You were an educator as well. I've always taught like lower elementary. And so, and I was thinking about, the whole library situation, and in my classroom, my goal is always to have representation for whatever students are in my classroom. And a lot of times I can tell on the outside whether they're African American, Asian, Latino, white, like that's easy to see. But how can I be more of an advocate in my classroom for queer students? I taught first grade, I've taught second grade, I currently teach third grade, and I'm not so naive to think that there might be some, children in my classroom that are questioning their identity. And so how do I do that? Courageously, I guess, because I feel like I'm not courageous. I feel that, and this has not been said to me specifically, but there's always that, if I put a certain book in my classroom, am I going to be, called on the carpet for it? So how can educators be more of an advocate, but how can we all, because I think that's just, needs to be part of who we are. We need to advocate for one another. Yeah.
Well, and I'll tell you, my experience was, I can remember around age 5, I knew that I was different. Now my husband will say he didn't know till his early 20s, so everybody's different. But I certainly would have been one of those kids in your classroom that I knew I was not like the other boys in the classroom, right? Yeah, and you're right. It is tough because in some communities, if you're really open about it, if you start putting the books about, trans children on the bookshelf, somebody's going to have a problem. Or if you put a pride sticker on your door, somebody's going to bring that up as an issue. And it's also, I think, the new challenge, for educators today is that queer kids and queer teens they don't want to be labeled so much anymore. They don't want to be fit into one of the letters or to say, well, I'm this or that. I'm really experiencing this more and more. They're like, I don't need you to know my pronouns. Just get to know me.
Sure.
So this might sound corny, but what I would say, and this was my experience as an educator, for one thing, I'm going to say is teachers have one of the hardest jobs on the planet. And I wish more people understood that and appreciated it. Partly because you are, in addition to teaching your content area, you're a social worker. I mean, we expect that out of teachers now. You are working, with the emotional lives of these children, with the social lives of these children. But I think the degree to which, with all the stress and strain that teachers have just to get the job done, they can find the time to really just love kids and to be present for them and to be as genuine as possible, so that when a kid is experiencing something in their life, whether it's about their sexual identity, their gender, or some problem at home, they know that adult is a safe person, that adult has said, I'm a safe person to come and be yourself with me, and you can trust me. I may not be able to keep everything you say to me confidential, but I will always do what's in your best interest. For me as a young person, those were the adults that I think made the difference, that made me know that there was hope that I could be who I knew I was. And so I think that, even more importantly than putting the pride sticker on the door, I think is what we need educators to be for kids today.
Okay. Thanks. I really appreciate that.
And Laura's certainly been a safe place. Several older teens have come out to her, as the person on the whole staff that they could trust. So she's definitely that. As you guys were talking and reflecting back on some of the things we've already talked about, I wrote down different conversations, different ways of gathering. Can we have better conversations? We mentioned the pastor didn't know how to have a conversation with somebody he disagreed with. Right? I mean, all I can do is be afraid of that and try to control it.
Right.
That's not good conversation. And over the past years, I've learned to listen better while I'm doing interviews, and Laura's taught me that. But better conversations and better ways to gather. It may not be a person on the stage and or a crew of people on the stage, like you mentioned before, that we're all watching. Maybe it'll be like you said, the coffee shops and places together where we really have that true growth and that more of a unified people that disagree with each other sometimes, but know how to get along. Unfortunately, Congress is no model for that for us right now at all. It's the opposite of that. And grown adults that we're paying a lot of money to represent us are behaving like children. And unfortunately, some of our bigger pastors, celebrity pastors, are acting the same way. And so we got to have better conversations and better gathering.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that?
Yeah, as much as I love social media and use it a ton, I think we're going to look back on this era and say that was one of the major drivers that made people stop talking to each other and started talking at each other. Mm-hmm. In my situation this past summer, much of what happened to me happened on social media. It was people attacking me who, I was saying it's much easier to throw a rock at a person if you can't see the blood and the wound that you've inflicted on them because they're so far away. Mm-hmm. I think to the degree to which we can step away from that being the way we converse so much with each other, COVID, unfortunately, I think did not help. I think COVID in some way isolated folks, and some of us got really used to it. Mm-hmm. And realized it's easier just to hang out with myself and the people that just agree with everything I say than to engage with the world. And some folks have not, I think, re-engaged since COVID. And I think that's been a problem in our culture. And as you mentioned, our politicians, many of them are not interested in governing. They're interested in platforming themselves by saying, outlandish things and doing outlandish things and getting the attention for it. So, again, I think if there's hope within the Christian faith, it will be the degree to which we can be that place for all kinds of people, whether they agree with our view of Christianity or not, to sit down and have conversation and see each other as humans, which I think ultimately is what religion is all about. It's supposed to be bringing us back to our sense of our shared humanity and reconnecting us to something bigger than ourselves, whatever anybody wants to label that. So, I think maybe that's the future of, if there's a hopeful future for Christianity, it's that would be we be the ones willing to foster those sorts of human, compassionate conversations that will accept people in their diversity. And as you said, be willing to listen and not talk quite so much.
I hope that's something we can experience in our lifetime. I really do. And I mean, I think we're seeing glimpses of it, but if not our lifetime, I mean, it does bring me hope for like our grandchildren,
We were.
And the good thing is they're being raised in a more diverse culture in many ways than we were privy to. It probably was diverse. We just didn't know it as much as they do. But they're so aware of the diversity of families and culture and lifestyle that I think kids today are much more accepting of a lot of difference than we would have been.
I agree with that.
We were in a situation online with something else, with a totally different thing that had to do with, an abuser being on stage and some things like that. And in that conversation, abuse survivors were saying to other men in the group who kept going, yeah, but, and explaining things. And these female abuse survivors were begging them to stop talking and listen.
Yeah.
And, so important to us. We designed an online conference that we're going to do in December, where it's just women voices. I think, like I said, we're talking over each other. I want to ask you one more thing before we wrap up. If you had a billboard, we ask this to almost everybody, and we never prepare them for it. But if you had a billboard that everybody could see, what would you put on your billboard? And I used to say it would be short, but Laura said it can be as long as you want.
As long as you want, your billboard.
It's your billboard. Might make someone have a wreck, but.
Oh gosh, I think mine would just say it's all about love.
Mm-hmm.
And leave that open to people to have the conversation as they drive by. Well, what's all about love? What kind of love is he talking about? Are they talking about? But I just wish if more people could get that in their heads. And I always say, I'm not going to talk about this BS tough love stuff or whatever. I'm talking about love that cares about people at the depth of their need, love that sees everybody as infinitely valuable and of infinite worth. Boy, how different would the world be?
Yeah.
How different would our communities be? How different would the church be if that was the message that we really were trying to give out there? So that's really been the focus of my ministry as a pastor. I think my church is probably tired of hearing it, but I'm going to keep preaching it.
Yeah.
Good deal.
Sure.
Yeah. Where can people find you? So you said that you're pretty active on social media. Is there a way that people can, find out the work that you do, or if they have, other questions for you, is there a way they can reach out to you?
I'm on Facebook, Brian Kirk. There's several of them, but you can figure out which one looks like me, I guess, if you do enough study. And you can find my church is also on Facebook, and we're also on YouTube, First Christian Church, St. Joseph, Missouri. Particularly if anybody wants to hear, well, what does a progressive liberal pastor who's queer have to say to people about the Bible or theological issues? And we do a quick little online service every week. It's pre-recorded. It's not a recording of the service we do in the building. So it's specifically made for our online folks. We keep it pretty short, but I do have a message each week, and we try to, share the ethos of what a progressive, queer affirming church is all about. So that would be the other place, I think, to find me.
Right.
It was a little tough for us to get together. I don't know why. You were traveling and doing some things.
Yeah.
It took us a little while to get this, but I'm definitely glad we got to spend a Saturday morning here with you. And I think our listeners are going to enjoy it.
Absolutely.
And hopefully some of them will reach out to you if they have questions and things like that.
Well, I appreciate the conversation. It's always good to find new allies out there. So
Absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah.
Indeed. And as, for the listeners out there, we thank you for tuning in. We're always glad when we get input from you, when we see you, when we get to hear your stories. But as always, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace. Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Karl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion, or we want to be contemplative, or simply ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to welcome you to our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that resonate with our fellow friends and seekers here in the desert.
Our hope is that you will find life for your body, soul, and spirit.
And now, here is our show.